Roger is Chief Sustainability Officer at GE, which, as you'll learn, please sit,
Thank you, David.
is doing a surprising amount of climate-related advances and strategic shifts, I would say. He leads all of GE's ESG work, et cetera. So, first of all, we just heard an interesting kind of setup for you because you're in nuclear too. You're in fission, right? And you have been for a long time in partnership with Hitachi now. So how does GE see the state of the energy transition we have to go through and that we're in?
Well, David, first of all, thank you for the honor of inviting GE to be part of Techonomy. It's inspiring to be here in the middle of the innovation hub for the world and thinking of us as a 130-year-old innovation company founded by Thomas Edison to innovate technology to lift up the quality of life for people all around the world. So never has that been more important, and the notion of collaboration with Techonomy, with the companies here, is really critical.
Yeah, most companies would like to say they were founded by Thomas Edison.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, walking up here and hearing all these young companies, if we were to all represent the age of our companies, I'd clearly be the oldest person in the room, but I think that's a good thing, and we can get into that. But in terms of the energy transition, it's significant. The fact that we're sitting here today, I think history will look back on this day, this month, this year, and say this was the era of climate innovation. This is when companies stepped up and said, we're going to innovate the technology the world needs to succeed in the energy transition. We've had policy, we've had research, and there's a lot of work to do. And we can talk about that. That's the theme here. But this is clearly the era of climate innovation. It's a common cause. And so lots of great things to talk about, and we're happy to be leading that innovation.
Well, there's some amazing stats about GE. I don't know whether you were planning to say them, but GE basically, equipment built by GE in one way or another, according to you guys, is responsible for creating 1/3 of all the world's electricity, right? And 90% of all the world's electrical transmission has some equipment in it built by GE. And then the last number was 40% of all the software in the world that manages electrical grids comes from you guys. So that is an extraordinary impact of one company. So I just wanted to say that. But now, so Ukraine war has really shifted all of our perceptions of where the world is headed and what we have to do and how hard it is. How do you see the impact of that event, given that you're so globally intertwined with energy?
Right, and one more statistic, 175 countries, which I think is a really important part because we want to solve this for the whole world, not just the United States, North America. Our ability to understand, to shape our technology, tailor it in all parts of the world, 175 countries is a key part of that 1/3. But thank you for asking about Ukraine. Last week, I spent the week in the UK, Brussels, and Berlin, and clearly this is the thing on everybody's mind for good reason, not only the conflict, but the impact beyond the Ukraine on energy. And just two thoughts on this. I think it goes without saying, obviously, hearts go out to everyone impacted by this. It's personal to me. My mother-in-law's from the Donbass region. She's home safe with us. But I see, from her Facebook, from her text messages, what's really happening on the ground and the uncertainty. So, of course, we want that to be resolved first and foremost. From an energy perspective, the theme last week was acceleration. It's a simple word. I think that's all we need to say. Everything people said they were going to do to address climate change, the energy transition, all still on the table. The plans haven't changed. We're just going to accelerate it. The need, it's not only about climate change, it's about energy independence. It's about access to affordable, reliable, sustainable electricity beyond Ukraine. And so whether it's nuclear, renewables, hydrogen, carbon capture, sequestration, we're going to see the EU, I think, leading this notion of acceleration. You can't do it fast enough. They need to do it by the winter season to stabilize things. And so I think it's really just building the momentum for the climate change efforts and decarbonization.
Just a question that you prompt me to ask. You guys, I think you're the only major American company that builds wind turbines. We're certainly the biggest, right?
In the US,
and there's a few others, but you guys are huge. And we've heard a lot of European countries announce radical increases in their wind plans because of even since the war. Is it possible to scale up and speed up the deployment of wind energy?
It's possible to scale it up, it's possible to speed it up. There are inherent limitations, not only in terms of the manufacturing, but you're dealing with government bureaucracies when it comes to permitting and bandwidth there. So everybody, again, it's a common cause. We're working with the governments. How can we accelerate the supply chain on our end? How can they accelerate the pipeline of approvals and commitments and things like that on their end so we can work in lockstep together? Can we do it by the winter season? Can we suddenly get more turbines spinning enough to make a difference? Not so sure, but the notion of energy diversity, there's a number of things we can do. Software is a big part of it. In my conversations last week, I said the number one thing you can do the quickest to get more energy efficiency, to bring more resiliency to your grid from cybersecurity, from weather events, from more demand, is software. Let's get the software in there and you'll see results immediately.
Yeah, and I know another thing you have that's a big business for you, or a growing business, is for utilities that are forced by law to accept solar from individual customers. They haven't really had the software to manage the complexity that introduces their grid. But if they can, it will be better for all of us. And that's another thing you're working on, just to throw that in. So you're a giant company. We just heard from a really interesting startup in nuclear. How do you think about GE's role and opportunity vis-a-vis, we're here in Silicon Valley, where startup is worshipped. Yep. How do you think of that?
It's a fair, astute point, and I think it's a best of both worlds scenario. We're dealing with some of the world's most complex technology: healthcare equipment, aviation equipment, energy equipment. Sometimes these are like controlled explosions happening within the tolerance of a couple human hairs. And so you need that legacy of multiple generations, even a century of technology to work against the laws of physics. You need this 175 countries. We want to solve this for the world. So you need the networks, the technology, the expertise of an incumbent. But we admire the startups. We admire the thinking outside the box, the passion, the energy, the nimbleness, frankly, the attention they draw to their ideas and to their interests. So we very much want to have a best of both worlds approach. The technical background of our incumbency, our global network, our global understanding, but thinking like a startup, thinking nimble. We have a research center in New York. I put it on par with anything in California. And the notion of collaboration. Startups are great about collaboration. They're great about partnerships. This is a common cause. We'll work with anybody who can help realize these mutual goals. And so we very much want to bring the best of both worlds to how we approach these issues.
So you're working on being a better collaborator, among other things. Yeah,
collaboration.
That's not easy for a lot of giant companies.
It's not.
Yeah. So when you have such an incredible portfolio of technologies, so you have a good perspective on what is going to help the most going forward. We've heard how urgent progress is. Where do you see the most exciting opportunity?
We're very much focused on the breakthrough technologies, and I think that's been a theme for today, is we want to deliver the best technology we can today to make the improvements, renewable, gas, grid. But we have people working labs today, again, in upstate New York and India. It's like a time machine. You go into our labs, you'll see someone working on a piece of a future jet engine that we may or may not use in 5 or 10 years to get a fraction of a percentage of efficiency. But we have to be doing that today. If we're not, who else is going to do it? And we're never going to make that progress. So we look at hydrogen as a fuel, sustainable aviation fuel, carbon capture sequestration, small modular nuclear reactors, and wind turbines that use superconducting technology. We took the technology from our MRIs, we're sticking them in wind turbines. The advantage of that is there's no rare earth metals. We cut out the rare earth metal supply chain.
Really?
So these breakthrough technologies is really where the excitement comes from, and where we have a lot of time making these investments.
So getting rid of the rare earths and all that helps us wean ourselves off of our reliance on China in particular, right?
The entire rare earth supply chain all around the world, which carries multiple consequences, conflict minerals, things like that. So we are looking to innovate not just the efficiency coming out of a turbine, but the whole life cycle and the design from an environmental perspective and a human rights perspective of what's going on.
That's an area we're going to hear more about from Michael Dunn later, talking about batteries and EVs. And so small, what do you call them? Nuclear?
Small modular reactors.
Small modular reactors. So, okay, fusion may or may not come to the rescue, but we have what you would, I'm sure, insist are safe new technologies for fission. Just quickly talk about how some of that's going to work.
Sure. So, I think nuclear has been the turnaround story of the last year or two. If you look just 2 years ago, there was a side in favor of it. Bill Gates, probably the most prominent person. There was a side strongly against it. Not that there's not still a debate, but we've seen a strong trajectory on the next generation of small modular reactors being part of the solution. So GE's invested in 2 ways. One is we've taken your classic nuclear reactor, and we've basically shrunk it down and modularized it. So 90% less footprint, built in 2 to 3 years, really? The most modern technology. And so all the this is not Homer Simpson's nuclear reactor. This is,
yeah, that didn't help your industry, but go on. Yeah.
This is a modular system. It's state of the art and huge momentum and traction. We're working with the Canadian government. We're working with Poland to get these online. There's another generation beyond that. We're also investing in the Terra Nova natrium reactor, which is, this will get beyond my expertise, but where ours is the modern adaptation evolution of the conventional nuclear reactor, this is a whole new nuclear technology. So both of these are being developed in parallel because we are seeing this momentum as the turnaround story, nuclear clearly having a hold as part of the net zero future.
Well, it's interesting. France is totally dependent on nuclear. Germany's shutting down all nuclear. But Belgium, in the face of the Ukraine invasion, they announced their 2 nuclear plants are going to stay online longer than they had planned. So there is clearly positive direction there. Now, you're also, I think, the world's largest jet engine maker.
2 out of 3 planes.
Yeah. 1 out of 3 planes.
2 out of 3.
2 out of 3 are your engines?
Yes.
So that's a lot. So you're the biggest. Okay. So we heard about sustainable aviation fuel. How big a deal is it, and can the problem we were just hearing about be solved?
Yeah, sustainable aviation fuel, very cool thing. And let me start with something very basic. Our engines run on sustainable aviation fuel. The technology is there. It's this question between technological feasibility and commercial feasibility. We had a plane take off in Chicago in December. It landed in DC. One of its engines, 100% sustainable aviation fuel. We've been running, I think, almost 400,000 flights on sustainable aviation fuel.
Well, as a part of the mix.
As a part of the mix,
Yeah.
and we're looking to get to 100% with Emirates and Etihad Airlines, I think, later this year.
Really?
So the question really becomes the pipeline for it. The technology is there, and how do you generate enough so it becomes feasible in a way that it does make that difference? So we're working beyond our engines across the whole life cycle of sustainable aviation fuel with refiners, with other people upstream, so we can create those pipelines. And just one more thing on this really quick, David, is but we never want to put all our eggs in one basket. So while sustainable aviation fuel is key, I think it's the most near-term solution, very hard to address sector. We're investing in hybrid electric engines. We're investing in hydrogen-fueled engines, and also open propeller engines that will reduce another 20% of emissions.
So hybrid electric engines, how soon do you think we can have those?
One of the things I've learned about this space is there's not going to be one size fits all solution. You may have a hybrid electric engine on a short haul flight like a regional jet, but when you have the double aisle, multinational flights, they may require a different technology like sustainable aviation fuel. So I think we're looking to test those, nearer term solutions on the smaller planes. Sometime in the next 5 to 6 years, we'll start to see that testing. We're innovating it now with possible feasibility this decade.
And getting to all electric engines is not something to hold your breath for, right?
Again, it depends on the type of flight. If we're talking short haul flights, different types of aircraft, things like that between 2, cities, it's a possibility. You really have to, right now, airplanes run on jet engines. That's a simple proposition. It becomes much more complicated when you look at these technologies. You got to kind of line it up and say this type of plane, this type of flight, possibly this one's going to be that, and it's going to be no one size fits all solution. We're investing in diverse technologies here.
Wow. Okay. Anybody have a question? Oh, that was a fast one over there. Oh, that's remote. Thank you. That's Drew monitoring the Zoom.
It is a little bit from the Zoom, but it's also personal to me. My dad was a GE lifer, one of the first nuclear engineers actually with General Electric in the 50s.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's always great to talk with someone from GE. The state of nuclear sort of energy in the United States specifically, I guess is what I'm asking about. For a long time, no new reactors were built, but there are 2 now being built, I believe, in the United States. My dad always said it was public perception and politics. That was always in terms of what was the, what prohibited nuclear from, and 3 Mile Island, of course. But what's the state of sort of nuclear in North America? And do you see, particularly maybe post-Ukraine, more momentum? Are you seeing some just inklings of more momentum in terms of more support for nuclear, particularly in North America or the United States?
Great question.
Sure. It is a great question, and great to hear about your father. I'd love to hear more about it. I do think this has been the turnaround story. When the Biden administration came in, we were reading the tea leaves. They didn't say much about nuclear. We're like, is this intentional? Did they intentionally leave it out? Are they trying to send us a message? They've been great to work with. Jennifer Granholm in her office, they've been fully on board with seeing the next generation of small modular reactor as part of the solution, partnering with us on demonstration projects, working with us to find a US partner. We've got someone in the works to help demonstrate it here. Ontario has actually led, I think, the global movement of supporting small modular reactors. They're ahead of almost anywhere in the world and saying we're going to commit to getting something online by 2027, 2028. And back to Ukraine, when I was in Europe last week, everything was, we want to be invested in small modular reactors for those who have been walking away from nuclear, maybe not as fast as you were alluding to earlier. And so it does seem like this has been the turnaround story, and we're happy to be at the center of that innovation.
And as a very brief follow-up, just so you think the future is more the smaller reactors,
Yes.
like my dad was because boiling water reactors, I remember BWRs, so that sort of large scale you see is evolving over time. Is it literally smaller?
So to our technology is the BWRX, so your dad would be proud. It's still the same technology, shrunk down about 90% of the footprint, built in 2 or 3 years in a modular way. The TerraPower reactor I was mentioning, which is the next generation, fundamentally different technology, but the near-term one, what we'll see coming online 2027, will be based on the work that your dad did.
Great, thank you.
So you've mentioned Biden, and this is the last question because we got to wrap, but policy, what policy would you most like to see that we don't have?
Certainty. The worst thing you can do to hurt this track of innovation, partnering with the government's great. They've been great partners. They share the risk, they share the outcomes, but the lack of certainty in tax credits and permitting, and are we going to approve this? Are we going to prefer that? That's the kind of thing that really holds up businesses from making the long-term investments, not just for GE. I think you've heard this as a theme all day today. And so we would ask respectively, it's not just the Biden administration, it's Congress, let's get together, let's decide what's good for this issue. Let's commit with some certainty so we can make, these are long-term decisions. These are big cycle investments. We just heard that. And lack of certainty will be the thing that really frustrates us.
And maybe the somewhat consensus around this war, or the response to the war, could have a breakthrough in getting at least a little consensus in Washington. That would be so good. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
So good to have you. Excellent. All right.